Hey, happy Monday.
Good morning. Happy Monday.
How are you?
Doing good. Starting to get it. Megan and I have been complaining to each other recently that fall is like our favorite season and only lasted like 2 weeks this year.
I know.
So it's already winter.
It's like cold and it's dark at like 2.
Yeah, so I've been
Not really,
complaining recently. But no, it gets dark so early and it's been frustrating. But
this is the last year they're going to do that, though, because the time change will be, it'll go away next year.
Really? I didn't know that. That's such good news. Because daylight savings is, I don't like it at all.
Savings,
it's rough.
yeah.
Yeah. How are
Hey,
you guys?
so you had a birthday.
I did.
Yeah. Yesterday?
Yeah. And I'm glad the more years I can put behind me, the better. Earlier,
Yeah, just tell that to people.
Well, no, not even kidding. So earlier this week, I was in a gas station, and someone turned to me while I was at the register, and true story, turned to me and said, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." He said, "How old are you?" I said, "I'm 26." And then they started laughing. They said, "Oh, I thought you look like you're 18, you know?" And so if I can put a few more years behind me, maybe, I don't know if I can grow this out. We'll see. Just appear a little bit older.
So you were 26 or you are 26?
I'm 27 now. I'm 27. Yeah. So now I can say late 20s and maybe get a little bit more credibility, but who knows?
Oh, you got credibility. Plenty of that. But, the day will come when you'll be like trying to go the other direction.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
Yeah. But no, it was really sweet. They surprised me at Skyrocket with a cake. And
They
sang to
did.
me. Yeah.
Nice.
Very kind.
Yeah, and so this was our Thanksgiving meal after church, both places. How'd yours go?
It was great. It was a great time just to go downstairs, to talk, to get to know people better, to eat a lot of good food. So we packed the tables with good food, and everybody showed up, brought some amazing food. So it was a really good time.
Yeah. We had no shortage of turkey and dressing and pie and all that good stuff too.
Yeah.
So, in fact, the fridge is
stocked full.
Well,
we'll be there right
now.
after this.
Right after this, we can go down there and
get some more
go
pie.
through the leftovers. No, I don't think the pie is gone. So,
yeah.
So, what did you guys talk about on Sunday?
So we talked about, as we've been working through survival mode, we started with, 3 weeks ago, the physical needs, and then more social, emotional, relational needs. This week we tackled a really heavy subject, mental health needs. Yeah. And I was really excited to talk about it this week because I've struggled with mental health things in the past, as well as, sometimes currently, it comes and goes. And then I have family members and friends who have struggled with it in a much more, intense way than I have. And so it's a topic that really hits very close to home. And so I was really excited to talk about it, to talk about it very openly in church, because it really is something that backs us into a corner and puts us in survival mode. But it's so hard to talk about honestly and vulnerably a lot of times. And so I was really excited for this week.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we talked a little bit. We looked at that a little bit. I think we used the same passage from Jonah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what a fun, incredible book. And was Jonah swallowed by a fish or a whale?
Yeah.
Or a lobster?
Did you watch the VeggieTales movie, the Jonah VeggieTales ever?
I don't remember.
I was just curious because
yeah. Or he smelled like a fish.
Yeah. I loved that was my favorite VeggieTales movie was the Jonah. So I was excited to preach this week for that reason too.
Wow. That's so
good old VeggieTales. But yeah, so what did you guys sort of talk about? What did you bring out of the book of Jonah?
Well, Jonah was running from God, and that was much of that's what brought on his crisis. That he was God was sending him on a mission, but he just refused to go. He didn't want anything to do with the mission because he hated the people of Nineveh, and he hated basically anybody who wasn't Jewish, and so he didn't want to go because he wanted to. He wanted God to punish them. And so, kind of unpack that a little bit and how, really a lot of our problem is, and I'm not saying all mental health stuff is this, because we didn't focus necessarily just on mental health, but a lot of our issue is the fact that, we're trying to live our lives without God. And humans were never meant to try to navigate the world without God. Mm-hmm. That God is like, God is everything to us. I talked a little bit about how some people will look at us and they'll say, God is your crutch. And I'm like, guilty. Yeah. That's true, because I do use God as a crutch to walk forward through life. You know, if you can't walk without a crutch, then get a crutch.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing wrong with that. And then I even went as far to say I'm more like a jellyfish that's washed up on the shore without a backbone. You know,
Yeah.
God's more like a backbone than a
God's the
crutch.
breath in our lungs, the blood in our bodies. We can't do nothing, you know, without God if we're in that place.
But so much of, and I don't want to imply that all mental health or all anything comes from that, but a lot of our struggle is because we're trying to live our lives in a way we were never intended to live, apart from God or going our own direction. You know, we want, the storm comes up, and Jonah is asked, who are you and where are you from? And he says, I'm a Hebrew and I worship, the God who made the sea and the land. Well, he wasn't denying God. He was just running from him.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, even as Christ followers, it's not that we deny that we worship God or that we are part of, that we have a relationship with God. It's just that we want to go a different direction.
Yeah.
So, all right. What do you guys talk about?
We talked about, first started off sharing some pretty alarming statistics of mental health and how it's just absolutely exploded within the last several years. I think over the last 2 years, anxiety and depression have gone up 25% worldwide. And a lot of that's due to the pandemic and closure and isolation, which you and I have talked about a lot,
Right.
is the effects of isolation. PTSD rates are up about 7 to 800% amongst, and PTSD is
Post-traumatic stress
post-traumatic stress disorder. Yes. And that's up 7 to 8 times. We don't know if that's because we're starting to measure it accurately now or if it is up, but we know that this is a much larger mental health issue than we thought. ADHD rates, I think I saw, are up. I forget the statistic. I had it written down in my sermon, but by a multiplication factor that's way huge over the last 20 years. And the biggest thing is over 50% of us, of Americans, will struggle with or will be diagnosed with a mental health illness over the period of our lives.
Wow.
So it's something over half of us will be diagnosed with or will deal with, struggle with over the period of our lives. And that was a recent study that came out, I think, 2020. And so it's a very serious issue. And then we get to the passage of Jonah, because you and I, we're big believers. The Bible is stories about God's interaction with humanity. And so the stuff that we deal with God nowadays, they dealt with, in the Bible too.
Exactly.
And I think Jonah is the perfect example of that, because he runs away from God, right? So God's like, go do this. And I can relate with Jonah. When God calls me to something, I run in the opposite direction. 9 times out of 10, at first. Like, it's true. And you know my story, and that there's several instances of that. When God calls me somewhere, I get anxious. Oh, no, I don't want to do this. I'm going to run in the opposite direction. Then in the belly of the whale, we hear this cry out from Jonah in Jonah chapter 2, where he's talking about, I am in the depths of hell, the pit of despair. I cry out to God, this sort of cry of desperation.
Yeah.
And then in Jonah 3 and 4, we actually hear Jonah multiple times plead with God to kill him. He is so discouraged and angry at God's mercy that he says, God, kill me. Take my life from me. I want to die. And so we sort of see a pattern of what appears to be, we're diagnosing, but he's struggling with a lot of the same mental health issues that a lot of us are struggling with today. And so we sort of just dug in. What does it look like to have a God that constantly is dialoguing with Jonah, not leaving him alone? Like, God won't give up on Jonah, that God doesn't take it away. And it's not like, oh, happy ending to the book. Because that's not always the case. A lot of times we have mental health issues our whole lives, but that God is right there arguing with Jonah, correcting Jonah, but showing him grace and mercy, bringing him back. So it was fun. We sort of just dug in and talked about Jonah and, what we can learn from his interaction with God.
Yeah. Okay. I wonder what he would be diagnosed as. I mean, definitely he had suicidal thoughts or he wanted to death. He didn't necessarily say, I'm going to kill myself, but he's saying, I want to die.
Yeah. But it seems he kept begging for God to kill him. But my thought is, too, if he goes up onto this cliff edge just to watch Nineveh, I mean, and he's not sitting in shade, because we read that the plant, so he didn't seem like he was watching out for his own health and safety. We'll just leave it at that. But yes, he's begging for God to kill him. But I don't know what he would be diagnosed with. That's a pretty modern term, is being diagnosed with, these illnesses. But
I was talking to a counselor who's in the church here, and he was saying that, well, first of all, let's set the stage. I was talking about how a large percentage of a certain age group is on medication for anxiety, depression. In fact, we talked to somebody not too long ago who said all of my friends in my age category, all of my friends are on anxiety medicine.
Wow.
And in fact, a statistic I saw said that 1/3 of kids from age 13 to 18 are on anxiety medication.
Wow.
1/3, which is amazing. Now, if you want the where I got that statistic, it'll be in the show notes. Yeah. Actually, it won't be because I forgot where I got it. But anyway, a lot of people, and I was talking with this counselor right after church, and he was saying, in his experience, a lot of times doctors write, they hear somebody struggling with something and they write them a prescription, and that's their tool is, I got to be careful because I'm not trying to shine a bad light on the medical profession. But at the same time, sometimes if you have a hammer, that's the only tool you know how to use. You're going to use your hammer. Church Christians, pastors, let me say it that way. Pastors, we're going to say, God is your answer. Jesus is your answer, right? So that's the only tool I have is Jesus. So a doctor might write a prescription. A counselor might say you need counseling. A preacher might say you need Jesus. But it's just an overwhelming number of people suffering right now. And I don't think it's as easy as writing a prescription or I need Jesus. I think it's
such a nuanced, the mental health crisis we're experiencing. I agree with you 100%. It's so nuanced because, and also not all cases are similar. So a lot of people are being diagnosed with, you have depression or anxiety, especially kids nowadays are being diagnosed with that right away. And cases are not all the same. Like there's cases of mild depression versus very, very severe clinical depression. In certain cases where maybe medication will help the best for this person. This person's getting medication, but what they need to do is stop being on their phones till 2 a.m. in the morning, stop getting 3 hours of sleep, stop playing video games all day and isolating themselves. Every single case, and there's this wide spectrum. But what we're seeing is, this person, just pray it away. This person prayed away. Tons of meds. It's almost like we've lost the ability to nuance because I think it's so overwhelming and it's growing so fast that we're sort of at a loss. At least it seems like that in the medical profession. And I would even say in our profession too, it's hard for us to talk about, like even just how do we talk about mental health? Where is God's place in mental health? Because we know Jesus has an element and an aspect, but again, we know that we can't just pray it away, and so it's there's no right answers here. I don't even know where I'm landing the plane. I guess what I'm saying is it has become so large and so nuanced of a topic that a lot of times we're shying away from it and taking the easy route instead of really giving it the depth of conversation and the depth of nuance that I think it deserves.
Yeah. Wow. So that's overwhelming. It's overwhelming, even as we sit here and try to answer it. I mean, I can think of, I remember years and years ago, I went through a period of burnout. Burnout. It was on the job. I was doing 2 jobs, in the church. I was a youth pastor. I was a children's ministry director at the same time. And it was way too much. And it wasn't working out. And I was going through this burnout. And then I took a retreat and it was a spiritual retreat, went to, it was the San Francisco Theological Seminary. They had this youth pastor retreat, and it was great. Mike Yaconelli was there. I don't know if you have ever heard of him. He's a big youth ministry guru. He passed away several years ago now, but maybe a decade ago or more. But for me, that spiritual retreat, just pray it away, actually made all the difference. In my particular case. But my burnout, my mental anxiety had to do with a ministry issue. And I came back and I did something different when I came back.
So a lot of times it's addressing that the response should address the issue.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, I know people where there's nothing underlying that's going wrong, where it truly is solely a chemical imbalance, in their brain, and where medication is 100% the best response. But because your issue was burnout ministry-wise, that a form of healing ministry of rest and of this retreat was what healed you. I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, that was the touch I needed. Absolutely. So Jonah's in the belly of a whale, probably a sperm whale, because it's the only thing with a big enough stomach. All right, Jonah's in the belly of a whale, and he gets puked out, and it looks like he got what he needed from God, and then he goes off to Nineveh to do the thing that God wants him to do, but he still. But he still doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want God's grace to happen to these people. And then the worst possible situation happens. They turn to God, And so what do we do when we cry out to God and we get the answer that we needed, but we're still not better? Or we return back to that sickness.
How I close the sermon, and it's what I found myself saying time and time again, because I'm not a professional counselor,
Right.
but it's the one thing that's gotten me through life. The one thing that I think is biblical, that I think there's a lot of proof of, is just taking things one day at a time. So we look at the book of Jonah, sort of every single period of his path that he's on. God calls him, he runs away, but God's still there.
Yeah.
He's in the belly of the whale. He feels abandoned and trapped, but God's still there. He, is very angry that God's offering the mercy, and yet God's still there. He got the wrong response from God. He did not want God's response all three times, and God gave him an answer, but not the answer he wanted. Do you throw your hands and do you give up? It's easy to want to do that, but just focusing on one day at a time. Because if we're focusing on 1 year in the future, the hard part, and this is something God's really been working on me with, we can set plans for ourselves. But if we're truly following Jesus to the best of our capacity, those plans it's completely worthless, because God might have other plans.
Yeah.
And so it's really easy to become overwhelmed with I feel absolutely hopeless because of my situation. I feel so incredibly this because of my mental health issue. I do not know how I'm going to survive. I feel like I'm hanging on by a thread. If you can focus on just one day at a time, ask God, give me the strength to just get through one more day.
Yeah.
Because focusing on 2 days, focusing on a week, a month feels like too much.
Right, because that's where the hopelessness sets in, right?
Yeah.
Because I was sick yesterday, I was sick the day before, and I say sick, I don't know that that's the right wording, but I had this problem the day before and the week before and the week before.
God, just get me through one more day. And the thing is God may never take that sickness away. I know a lot of people who've struggled with mental health up for entire lives, decades plus. But God can get us through one day, and he will get us through one day. He's there with us, and his answer might be no, but he's giving us an answer, and that's our God. We serve a very real God who is there, who is giving us an answer, who is dialoguing with us. So we're not alone. We are never alone, and I think that's the biggest, most important thing too, is that in the pits of despair, we aren't alone.
Yeah.
The answer might be no, so we can be angry about that and be angry with God. It's okay to be angry with God, but just keep asking him every day. And the answer might be no every day, but you're getting an answer.
Yeah.
And if you don't cry out to God every single day, then it's easier to lose hope because you're not hearing his voice, And I found that too. When I'm angry at God, when I get an answer I don't want, I sort of ignore him, right? And then I fall further away because I haven't heard from him in weeks. But if I call out to him every day, I'm going to get an answer, every day. Or, it's the practice of calling out. Yeah. I don't know if I'm making sense at all or not, but
You are. So when I was in seminary, I worked at the Center for Mental Health in the town that our seminary was in, and I was a group home director, and one of the jobs that I had, I worked with dual diagnosis patients, and they were all schizophrenic men who also did some other, they were self-medicating. Because at some point, they're hearing voices, or it's schizophrenia, they're hearing voices, and they want to push those voices out. So they usually it was alcohol. So they begin to self-medicate with alcohol and became alcoholic and schizophrenic. And so now, how do they navigate it? And our point, they had to stay on medication, and they'll never go off medication. And miraculously, some of the medications today, even, that was, that was a lot of years ago now. And the medications have gotten better and better for schizophrenia over the years. But some of the medications, even then, were really great. But the medications could help tone down the voices if they stayed on the medications. But their mental health issue was never going to go away. But they had something to do that day, and to get through that day, and to stay focused on that day. And even sometimes it was just the moments in that day that mattered. So I like what you're saying. Just cry out to God for today.
Yeah.
Maybe God will meet my need today.
Yeah. And it's coming from a story from I had a period in time in college where I had, we have our plans. So mine was very situational, my struggles, my mental health issue. But I had all of these plans laid out with this particular person that I thought I was going to be with, this road, this path, this career path, everything. And all of that came absolutely crashing down. And I fell and I spiraled. And again, going down the whole self-medication thing, I started drinking a lot. I was really diving into my faith and sort of tearing down the bricks that I had been taught, because I grew up in a very Christian household. But do I actually believe and think this stuff? And getting to that point where realizing all of the self-medicating stuff, all of the thinking of the future, because thinking of the future, my whole future had just been torn down, absolutely overwhelming. It was impossible to get out of it. And that's what depression feels like, just impossible to get out of bed in the morning. A lot of times people think depression is just sad. A lot of times it's just an absence of feeling at all. Can't get out of bed in the morning, but just being able to focus on one day at a time, one tiny habit. Hey, I'm going to stop drinking today, and not thinking about tomorrow, but I'm going to think now about day 2. I'm going to think about day 3. I'm going to focus on exercising today, not thinking about a week, a month. And this is even for those of us who maybe still carrying those habits to today. I'm still sort of living the same way, even though I'm in a much better place right now. But yeah, I feel like a lot of times when we're giving encouragement to someone who's going through these issues, we have to know that we don't know what it feels like, and we don't, all we can do is share our experiences, but everyone's going through a completely different situation, a completely different reason for feeling the way why they're feeling. And then the healing might come from a different place too. And so it's so nuanced, but we serve a God of nuance, which is pretty cool.
Sometimes I can't really speak to her profession. Leslie, my wife, is really good at what she does. But some of the times I hear her talking about getting out of your head and into your body, and sometimes just moving. The act of physical movement can make a huge difference, because we don't necessarily want to move when we're overwhelmed with our anxiety or our trouble. We just oftentimes want to curl up and not do anything. But breathing and getting up and moving, and I do think you're onto something when you say something about staying on your phone till 3 a.m. Some of our crisis especially with our younger generations, has to do with the fact that we've given them this device, and these devices are speaking into their lives. And I'm comparing my life with, all of these people who are posting how good their life really is, but it's not real. It's, they're posting a moment in time when the picture was good and they got to pick it. And here, this is me, and I'm celebrating this, and I'm having my lunch, and look how perfect my lunch is, or whatever. I don't even know. But,
And not just from the comparative aspect too, but you go to the scientific aspect of phones. I mean, that truly is a takeaway. If you have children, they're going to be much more highly susceptible to mental health issues now, simply because of the digital age we live in. So I have family members who are experts in the public health field, nurses, as well as school counselors. And it is scientifically proven that just the light from your phone changes the hormones that are in your brain. So it completely disrupts your sleep cycle. And we know if you're not sleeping correctly, you are not developing correctly. It quite literally hurts your brain development. It hurts your brain development. It's all these issues that are just completely compounding. And it's very, very real. And it's really, really discouraging. So, yeah, being intentionally aware, especially if you're a parent, to hold the horses with
Yeah.
your kids on the digital. And I'm speaking as someone who's on my phone way too much. So, I'm definitely not trying to speak from a pulpit. I'm speaking from someone who's terrible at it and on my phone too much. But, I worry for our kids.
Yeah, I do too. I think it concerns me to see, oftentimes I'll see somebody pushing a stroller and the stroller going by and there's a kid, with some kind of screen in this, and I'm like, that kid should be like looking at the world, but instead they're like watching some cartoon. What part does God though play? Are you okay with God being your crutch?
I was in small group yesterday. So in our small group yesterday, I think it's okay for me to share this. We were talking, and one of the people in our small group was just talking, and it really hit close to home because I agree 100% that like, if talking about God as first and everything else, not God, then family, friends, but like God, everything else has to be substantially lower, not just God and then family's barely next or my kids are barely next, but like God and everything else down here. Because he's talking about if eternity is real and if we truly care about God, it's nothing else, everything else pales in comparison.
Yeah.
And it's so true. If we think about, and so Megan and I were talking in the car on the way home from our small group. If we look, what would our lives look like if we didn't follow Jesus? And if our lives would look the same, we are completely biffing it.
Yeah.
And so the truth is God's not just a crutch. Like he is everything. My goal is that my life would look so different if I wasn't following Jesus. I would be a completely unrecognizable person. And I know how flawed and bad of a person I am on the inside. And so I think I hope that I can say that if Jesus wasn't a part of my life, I would be out doing so much other stuff. And I think it's okay to say that. Yeah, God's my crutch. He's also the one I'm running towards. He's what enables me to take a breath every moment, every day.
Mm-hmm.
I'm dependent on him for everything. Not just, he's the legs, he's everything.
Yeah.
Because if he's not, we're completely wasting our time. And this is all just a waste. Like this podcast, like every moment, especially us in ministry, like we've wasted our lives completely.
I think about it. If I were to say out loud the conversation that I'm having with God as I walk through my day, people would think that dude's crazy. Because I'm walking down the street and I'm talking to God, God, what do you think about, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's just, I've seen people walking down the street just talking to the air and thought, man, that poor guy, he needs some,
he needs some help.
He needs some medication, some of that strong.
Here's one thing I want to say. I really struggle to rely on God. So yes, God is the one. He's our more than a crutch. We've established that, but he is a crutch is something you lean on when you're not well, right? Yeah. When you're sick. So this is just me personally. I hate asking for help. I hate relying on other people. It's one of my struggles. I've realized I'm bad at relying on God too. Mm-hmm. Relying on God. Cause I like having JD's plans for the future. I like to have control of all of that, but actually truly surrendering that and being like, God, I need you. That's so hard. Yeah. And so it's one thing that, yes, God is a crutch and it's easy to say, but to actually do it, I'm still learning how to do that, to actually rely on God. And I think that really applies to mental health. Not necessarily relying on God to take it away, but relying on God for today to give me what I need. Because the Bible promises us that he will give us what we need for every single day. Yeah. And we can do that, whether it's mental health issues or physical needs, everything we've been talking about this survival mode series. Yeah, we should be relying on God. So is there a correlation, do you think, between, so we've got this mental health crisis, which is real. Obviously COVID is just this massive disruption that has, Carey Nieuwhof says, we have never had a bigger disruption in all of our lives than COVID. And he's right. In our lives. I think World War II probably, that would have been a bigger disruption for most of Europe and maybe even America. But for us, is there a correlation between, church attendance is way down all across the nation. Even, generations coming up, there are less and less people who rely on their faith, who say that, that they're believers.
Is there a correlation between pushing God out of the center of our lives and our mental health crisis, do you think?
I feel like that's a trap question because I would say for some cases, yes, for some cases, no. And because, again, it's nuanced. And so there's this wide gamut of people experiencing mental health issues in a degree of severity.
Yeah.
And we hate judging people and placing them on that spectrum, but some people, it's very much chemical imbalance in the brain. They will probably be dealing with it their whole lives, and medication is 100% needed.
Yeah.
Other people, it is really situational where I'm not going to church. I'm not putting God at the center of my life. I'm sitting at home all day, every single day. No wonder you feel isolated. So I would say yes, 100%. For certain situations. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that it is a trap question. So there is that. But I think that if you're told you were created in the image of the living God, you're precious to God, you have purpose, meaning, you're eternal, that's one way of looking at life. And another way is saying, no, you're actually a fluke accident and you've got these few years and then there's nothing after that. I think our outlook on life, I think the way we, our hope, everything changes based on that foundational.
I agree. I'm thinking of a conversation I had with a friend who's agnostic, thinks there might be God, think there might not be. And they're saying, like, I'm struggling to hold on to hope.
Yeah.
And I was sort of nihilistic. I was sort of not mean, but I was like, honestly, if I didn't think there was a God, I would be in the exact same boat as you. I would be severely depressed because there wouldn't be a point,
right.
And so I agree with you. I think a lot of people that it's the seed that's planted in their heart, the God-shaped hole is crying out.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. If there is no God, then obviously our job is awful because we're misleading people. If there's no God, but beyond that, eat, drink, and be merry.
Yeah.
Do anything you want because there's no consequence. There's no reason. There's no purpose. There's no meaning. And my mental health will go to places, if that's the truth, if I were to somehow discover that there wasn't a God, I would be in a bad spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think you're answering your question 100%, that this way our culture is headed, where it's much more self-centered. I would say it's sort of always been that, but it's just more explicitly so now. It's of course we're going to be experiencing these feelings of desperation and hopelessness more.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. Any other thoughts for the...
I think, Justin, what was your question that you had?
As a Christ follower, when things aren't going well, does that mean I'm not believing enough or strong enough, or am I doing something wrong?
Yeah, because a lot of Christ followers have and do experience mental health breaks or depression or anxiety. All of the things that humanity is prone to. Christians are also prone to those things too. We're not immune, just like physically we're not immune from disease. Neither are we immune from a mental struggles.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, and I have to be careful saying this. Well, first off, like you said, we experience life just like everyone else. And even Jesus says if we're following him, life will be even worse. I think a lot of times God gives us struggles, or he lets us go through struggles because it helps us to relate to other people. So even Paul, he complained about the thorn in his flesh. God, take it away from me, but not as I will, but you. And God said, no, my grace is sufficient for you. A lot of times we have these struggles that we're deeply insecure about. I know I have mine. So I am a doubter, and my faith truly is so small. And it's something I was always insecure about and still am. How can I be in ministry if my faith is so small compared to all these people? But maybe God is using me for that fact, not in spite of, but because of. Yeah. And I think I would encourage you, if you're dealing with a very serious mental health issue, to maybe consider that. Maybe God is not going to use me in spite of my depression, but maybe because of my depression, because it means I'm going to be able to relate to and speak to those who are crying out to God in that state. And I'm going to understand like someone who hasn't been there before. If I've been in the belly of the whale, I'm going to be able to talk to people in the belly of the whale versus someone who's always been on land, you know? And so I think a lot of times God lets us have these thorns because it's the only way we're going to be able to actually understand real life and then relate to other people who are in those exact same scenarios. It's just hard. I'll say personally, it's hard to get there, and it's hard to battle that insecurity that God has still chosen you, even though you're dealing with this thorn that feels like is insurmountable.
Yeah. You said, if I follow Christ, life is going to be worse. And I think what you meant was Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble.
Yes, that's what I meant. It's a lot better, trust me.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not that you won't have trouble.
Yeah.
It's in fact, we take on a whole set of other problems because we're following Christ. And so I think that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
Because there's persecution and there's, whatever struggles. It's a lot easier when you're just in it for yourself, although it's shallower.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then if you have, Jesus talks about faith like the size of a mustard seed, you can move a mountain. I don't think the amount of faith is the thing. It's just real.
Yeah.
If that speck is real, he can use that speck. So sometimes our struggle and our suffering, though, is a direct result of the fact that we're doing things that get us in trouble.
Yeah.
For Jonah, he got swallowed by a whale. He was running from God, got swallowed by a whale. Does that mean, my house got hit by a tornado? God, I really must have blown it because you let a tornado hit my house. Or I got a bad diagnosis because I wasn't following Christ or something like with all my heart. I don't think that's the way it works.
No. And again, it's nuanced. Some cases will be you're reaping the consequences of your actions. Other cases will be I don't deserve this and it just happened. Like Job, like the tornado hitting your house. There's examples of both cases.
Yeah.
And so if a pastor comes to you and tells you exactly why something is happening, be suspicious, because when in these nuanced situations, it's hard to know if it's a consequence of your actions or if it's just there and happening to you, because we don't know necessarily.
Right. I remember when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, and somebody, I was speaking, I think it was like the next day I had a speaking gig, and somebody said, "Oh, if you're going to get up there, tell them about that's God's judgment on New Orleans." And I've been to New Orleans, and there's a lot of shady and even I would even say demonic or weird witchcraft, voodoo-y kind of stuff that happens in New Orleans. But was that a result of God's judgment, or was it the fact that they built a city below sea level? And every once in a while, a hurricane is going to come up.
It's a matter of time.
Yeah. And so sometimes being human in these physical bodies that are prone, that are weak and prone to illness, being in relationships with people that have free will. I mean, we're going to suffer, and we're eventually going to die, physically die. So I would answer that question. That is, could it be that God was sending his judgment on somebody for the way they're living? It's possible. But I would say that's probably a really bad assumption to jump to.
Yeah.
Hey, I think that wraps it up.
Yeah. Monday matters, and excited to. It's been a fun series. I don't know about you, but I really like the series, and excited to talk next week and sort of wrap it up before Christmas time.